when I look at soldiers, I realize, wow, these soldiers are the most special Jews that I know. And this really helped me. Now, would I have thought of that 2-3 years ago? I might have, but I didn't have a chance to think about it. I took much more notice of what soldiers go through when they're in the army, when they're in Gaza, when they're in Lebanon, they're training. And obviously, everyone has to be the best Oved Hashem possible. But the soldiers that are going in to defend Klal Yisrael, in terms of being an Oved Hashem, I think nothing compares to that. And this is a perspective I received after October 7th.
I'm Scott Kahn, and this is The Orthodox Conundrum. This is The Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com. I'm Scott Kahn. Today marks 1 year since one of the worst days of all of our lives, October 7th. I actually was unsure of how to record an appropriate episode. What exactly could I add to the conversation? What is there to say that hasn't yet been said? And how can I relate it to the season in which we find ourselves, right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur? Fortunately, I was joined by the outstanding Rav of my shul in Ramat Beit Shemesh, Rav Chayim Soloveichik, who provided insights and guidance as to how to think about this first anniversary of October 7th, even though he acknowledges October 7th never really ended. I was honored to hear Rav Chaim's ideas about what he has learned from the events of the past year, the ways in which our liturgy during the 10 days of repentance is more relatable than ever before, approaches to divine providence and miracles, as well as their apparent absence, how to foster unity in the Jewish people, why the obvious importance of Torah study does not exempt people in the Chareidi world from serving in the Israeli army, whether there is hope for peace in the future, and more. Rav Chaim and I recorded this just a few hours before I'm releasing it, and he asked me to add one point in case it wasn't clear from the podcast itself. When he offers his opinion that Israel cannot realistically make peace with terrorist groups, but can with countries, he said that Iran is the major exception. As long as Iran is run by fundamentalists bent on Israel's destruction, there is no room for any kind of actual deal. On the other hand, he told me that his son, who is currently serving in the army, said that he's looking forward to skiing in Lebanon next winter, not because Israel will keep any land, but out of the hope that when Lebanon is free from Hezbollah, the Israeli people can forge a friendly relationship with our neighbor to the north. Listen to the podcast and you'll get a better sense of what he means. Rav Chayim Soloveichik made Aliyah over 25 years ago with his family and is the Rav of Kilat Or Shalom in Ramat Beit Shemesh. He has been inspiring students of all ages for over 35 years. Rav Chaim has been a Rebbe at Reshit Yerushalayim since making Aliyah and teaches at Yeshivat Or Moshe, a high school in Beit Shemesh. Please note that when Rav Chaim refers to his father, he's speaking of Rav Aaron Soloveichik Zatzal. Rav Chaim Soloveichik, thank you very much for joining me today on the Orthodox Conundrum podcast.
I'm happy to be here.
Now, we're recording this in the Beis Medrash of your shul on October 7th, 2024, also 3 days after Rosh Hashanah, 5 days before Yom Kippur. And I wanted to discuss with you the confluence of the Aseret Yemei Tshuva, the 10 days of repentance, and the day marking 1 year since all of our lives changed forever, since Israel changed forever. I just wanted to get some messages, perhaps some ideas of what you're thinking about on a day like today, standing in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and on this very, very difficult anniversary. We feel it especially in Israel. I'm sure people in America feel it very strongly as well. I want to perhaps hear some messages that you can convey to our listeners. I'd like to open up by talking about something that I felt, I'm sure many, many others felt, and you actually mentioned it in shul, that certain aspects of davening on Rosh Hashanah were resonant in ways that they never were before. For example, Avinu Malkeinu. In my own experience, I would usually pay attention in past years to the lines about livelihood, parnassah, or refuah shlema, being healed, or chaim tovim, having a good life, and the things about closing the mouths of our accusers or stopping our enemies seemed not anachronistic, but not so relevant to our day-to-day lives. And this year it was completely flipped. Those were the lines that meant the most, that had the most resonance for me. And perhaps you could talk a little bit about that.
Well, actually, today in shul and davening, as we know, during Slichos is very long. When it got to, and you're always wondering, what should you do to speak about the day, to mark the day? And we're in the middle of Slichos. We say Tehillim every day. We've been saying Tehillim since the beginning. 3 parakim of Tehillim, 3 chapters of Tehillim after every single tefillah. However, today I sort of highlighted, and in a very, I would say, emotional, loud voice, that that part of Avinu Malkeinu, which begins with, I don't know, sit in front of me, Nekom Nikmas Avadecha V'Shafuch. And that really is what we think about what happened October 7th last year, was a slaughter. And there were Jews, there were actually citizens of the country, people that were taking hostages too. That describes a day. But there's no question that when you listen to any part of the tefillah, even during Slichos today, Harem Karen Yisrael Amecha, and during Slichos, there are so many aspects of our tefillah this year that are so much more relevant. And I found myself connecting much more to the tefillah this year. And not only that, I actually found the tefillah much more difficult because just so much of the tefillah is much more meaningful than it was. That after davening is over, I feel emotionally exhausted from everything that we daven to Kadosh Baruch Hu for.
I felt something similar, I think, on the night of Rosh Hashanah, the first night, when we do the simanim, we eat symbolic foods. It's sort of the fun part of the meal. We enjoy it. And there's so many that we always have that are about stopping our enemies. May our enemies be ended. And you often say those sort of with a flourish and a laugh. And this time it just wasn't funny. It was a completely different experience.
I think that a lot of times we daven and we don't think about what we're saying. I'll just mention a story that happened to me. I'm not sure, it must have been 21 years ago, I forgot. It was during the first Shemitah that we observed here in Israel, my first Shemitah. And obviously, you grow up in a religious house, you're used to many different mitzvos and practices, and as I would say, most of what we do is a cup of tea. Then you move to Israel, and all of a sudden, a new concept is thrown upon you, Shemitah, and it's like you feel every single second that you're doing something wrong, something right. It's, Baruch Hashem, over the years, we've gotten used to Shemitah a little bit, how to deal with Shemitah in the house and in the kitchen. And then that year, I saw a sign that I took very seriously, that not speaking from a halachic perspective, but speaking from a political perspective or a nationalistic perspective, that if we're going to go ahead and buy Arab produce, you never know what each vegetable that we buy or every fruit is going to support our enemies. And I saw a sign there that talks about cucumbers buying grenades. And from then on, I was for the rest of that Shemitah, I was very careful not to buy any Arab produce. It really bothered me. And I remember it was the last day of Shemitah. It was Erev Rosh Hashanah. And there used to be a fruit and vegetable store on Nachum Or. And I noticed that they had a sign, a certain hashkacha, and it was clear to me that they were selling Arab produce. And I don't know what got into me. I'm not like that. I walked into the store and I saw they were selling selek beets with Arab produce. And it really bothered me. And I went to the owner of the store and I said to him, "You sell selek here?" In Hebrew. And he asked me, of course. I said, "And what do you do with selek?" And he gives me this look like I'm a stupid American. He says, "You eat selek." So I said, no, what are you going to do with it Rosh Hashanah night? And he says, Rosh Hashanah night, you prepare it, and we say the simanim, and we say, Yiratzon v'necha Hashem Elokeinu v'seinu sheyistalku soneinu.
Their enemies should be removed.
Enemies should be removed. And I said, I don't understand something. I said to him, you're using Arab produce to say this tefillah? And he said to me, Ma, it's the badatz. It's the best supervision. So I said, I understand, but on one hand, you're supporting the Arabs, and on the other hand, the people in Gaza. On the other hand, you're using this, you're supporting our enemies, and then you want to make a tefillah, a prayer, that God should remove the enemies. He looked at me, and he gave me an answer, and he said to me, what do you want? This is my parnasah. This is my livelihood. I accepted that. I said, okay. Shana Tova, I walked out. So there's a second part to the story. But the first part of the story is that I took from that so many times we say things and we don't mean it. And our tefillos are full of so many prayers that we say. And speaking about the ultimate redemption of Israel, the protection of the Jews in Israel. And I would add in Jews coming back to the land of Israel. And the question is, do we really feel it? Do we think about it? I would just add that this year, I was very emotional during my tefillot. And when I said the prayer for the state, and that one line, the prayer for state, that God should bring all the Jews back to the land of Israel. In that line, I was also very emotional because we know it wasn't a simple year for Jews outside the land of Israel either. So I think we can learn to listen much more much more to the tefillot that we say and connect to them, because the tefillot are so beautiful. And if we want to know how to commemorate something and to feel about something and think and how to express, the best place to look is in our tefillot.
I want to come back to what you said about Arab produce in a few moments when we get to some of the things we learn about October 7th, because that still viscerally bothers me, and I'll explain why when we get there, and I'd like to hear your take on that. Before that, I want to talk about something that happened the night before Rosh Hashanah, which was the Iranian missile attack, where almost 200 missiles were sent, ballistic missiles. I've heard it said that it was the biggest ballistic missile attack against another country in history. And during the day, we heard all of a sudden, maybe 3 hours before nightfall, that tonight is going to be something big. Iran is attacking. So it's a matter of getting your affairs in order. We had no idea if this was going to be an all-night or multiple-day type of thing. We'd have to be in our bomb shelter. About an hour before it happened, our son Yaakov called us up and said, okay, I'm going into Lebanon. I got to give him my phone. And then an hour after that, we're sitting in our bomb shelter. The confluence of these particular activities these events, it was so emotional and very, very heavy for us. And then an hour after this started, we're told you can come out. Everything's basically okay. And at that time, I wrote on Facebook, if this isn't a miracle, what possibly is? Now, some people wrote back a couple things. Some people said, no, it's not a miracle. This is a success of engineering and Iron Dome. And I'll just say what I said to that, which is that itself is the miracle. Fine. Let's say, for example, that nothing got through exclusively because of not technically Iron Dome, but David Sling and the Arrow system. Let's say technically nothing got through. The fact that a country besieged and hated by the entire world has been able to create such a system with help from its partners, that itself is part of the miracle. I remember reading a line by Robert McNamara, the Secretary of Defense during the Six-Day War in the United States under Lyndon Johnson. And he wrote in his autobiography, in retrospect, that at the time they expected Israel to win, they all knew Israel was going to win. He said either in 7 days or 10 days. So people might say, oh, so it wasn't a miracle. No, the fact that a country that's 19 years old, founded by survivors of the Shoah and people kicked out of Arab lands, was able to be routing its enemies, that itself is the miracle. And I feel the same thing is true here.
For sure, there's no question. I think our responsibility as Jews living in this time is to find the Kadosh Baruch Hu, to find God in every success that Israel has, or in any success the Jews have. One of the things I've been super careful about since the war started is, there's a very beautiful tefillah we say in Sukkot Zimra every day, except for Shabbat and Chag. And that's called Mizmor Latoda. We're not going to say it this coming Friday either, on Yom Kippur, Erev Yom Kippur, We can't say it Erev Yom Kippur because the Korban Toda was not brought Erev Yom Kippur since you did not have the usual amount of time to eat it. And the Korban Toda was a Korban that was given to thank Hashem for, I would call, everyday miracles that, happen in our lives. Someone traversed the desert, someone traversed the sea, and he came out alive. Someone got up from his bed from a sickness, so someone got out of jail. And the truth is, a person go ahead and look and say, hey, you know what? I traversed the desert, but I came with enough water, and I had my maps and everything. But still, we have to go ahead and find the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And the Shulchan Aruch is based on a medrash in Tehillim. Tells us that you should say Mizmor L'Sodo of a shir, because that's going to be the only parak of Tehillim that remains when Mashiach comes at the Gula. Now, I don't think that's literal, but I think it's underscoring a point that if we want to know what's going to bring the Gula, so it's the concept of Mizmor L'Toda, thanking Hashem for all the miracles that happen within the laws of nature. The laws of nature actually mean that when Am Yisrael, Medina Yisrael, and Sahal prepare themselves, and anything they have done actually works, we have to go ahead and we have to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's the role of Mizmor L'Toda, and it's a very important role that we have to work on.
I think that's probably the pshat in the pasuk that says, "Im Hashem lo yivneh bayit, shav amlu vonavbo." If Hashem doesn't build a house, then the builders did nothing. It doesn't mean the builders did nothing. Of course, the builders built a house, but they have some sort of divine assistance along with everything they do.
Right, for sure. Now, I would just mention, I saw someone, not at this ballistic attack, but the previous ballistic attack before Pesach, wrote an article to prove statistically how we know there was a miracle involved. I didn't need to see that. My wife wanted me to read it. To me, it was so clear as a miracle that, obviously some people could try to understand the statistics and how it worked out, but we have to find HaKadosh Baruch Hu in every single thing that happens.
The other side of it, though, that someone wrote was, when I said, hey, this was a miracle, he said, yeah. And at the exact same time, 7 people were murdered in Yaffo by a terrorist. And in a parallel way, tragically, mamash, moments before we went into Rosh Hashanah here in Israel, we heard about 8 soldiers who were killed in Lebanon right before the Chag. And it's so hard sometimes, Rav Chaim, to balance that feeling of Hashem is with us, the tremendous miracle of Iran, and also everything that's been going on for the past month, the success after success, it seems, in Lebanon, and then hearing this disheartening, terrible, tragic story or stories at the same time. How do you balance those?
We always have to find and feel like Kadosh Baruch Hu is there. And there are things that are going on in this world. And there are messages that, no matter how well we do, and Baruch Hashem, there's so many successes, we're still not there yet, and we have to still go ahead and we have to work hard and show the ishtadlut, the effort to accomplish the goal. One of the things that I mentioned in Rosh Hashanah, I spoke about the bracha of Shomea Kol Shofar Mazin Truah. That sometimes HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we don't know, sometimes we're so happy, and then HaKadosh Baruch Hu has to work very hard to hear the truah. The Kol Shofar is the happy call, the happy sound, and we have to go ahead and we have to work hard. And even in tragedy, we have to recognize that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is here. And yes, there are certain things we don't understand. The truth of the matter is, I don't think you understand anything that's going on, even when we are so happy about the successes of Tzahal. We don't. Why are we here? Why are we doing this? Why are our kids not in yeshiva or at home with us for Yom Tov? It's heartbreaking. So I think it's just the message is that we're living at a time when we're fighting for something. We're working towards something, and until that day comes, there's still going to be some misfortune. Hopefully, that time is coming to an end now. We'll just have a time of joy. But I think that maybe the message is that while and again, I don't know why any of this is happening, but certainly for us, the lesson to learn is that while we're being misameach and happy about our successes, we still have to remember the tragedy that we experienced in the previous year. And the tragedy that happened, I don't want to say ongoing. I hope this is it. But the tragedy that happened right before the missiles were sent out, and the tragedy that happened Erev Yom Tov. We still have to. We can't just have joy in our hearts. We have to also experience and think and connect to the tragedies and the hurt that have been happening.
We've not yet reached the end goal, I suppose.
Right.
Yeah. I now want to get into something that your uncle, Rav Soloveichik, said in Kol Dodi Dofek. Hashem sometimes knocks at our door. Hashem knocks and wants to be let in. He's giving us the opportunity to let him in. And I think in some ways, thinking about October 7th it's a knock. It might be an unpleasant knock. It might be a terrible, tragic knock. But there are messages for us to learn. When I had Rav Yoni Rosenzweig on the podcast almost a year ago, he said at the time something which I thought was very important. He said that, yes, there's always a message to learn, but if the message is something which you already knew, then that can't be the message. Hashem doesn't have to bring tragedy to teach you something that you already know. And I added my own twist to that, saying if the message is about somebody else, meaning what I've learned from this is that he's got to change, then that's not the message either, because that's not very helpful for me to be confirmed that I'm okay, but he's a problem. So I'd like to talk about some of the changing viewpoints, some of the things that we might be able to derive out of October 7th. Let me just make clear in case anyone misunderstands. I'm not saying that's the reason for October 7th. We do not know why Hashem sometimes allows evil to triumph. However, there can be an implicit message in the hiding of God's face, something that we're supposed to take from it. And Rav Chaim, perhaps you can talk a little bit about some of those messages.
Well, first of all, to speak about the messages of October 7th is very challenging. I'm sure everyone can find different messages, and there's a lot to speak about. I would just mention that, in my opinion, it's still October 7th. I think it's very important. People are posting today, Zachor will never forget. I don't think we're there yet. It's impossible to forget because it's happening as we're here. There are still hostages. We're hearing stories constantly. People, today we just heard a story of someone that was actually killed on October 7th. The family just found out about it today. There's a pasuk in end of the Chotai, I believe. V'zacharti apriti Yaakov v'yafesh briti Yitzchak v'yafesh briti Avram eskor v'aretz eskor. And Chazal asked the question, why is the word Zachor not mentioned next in the briti Yitzchak? And Rashi points out, because the ashes of Yitzchak are still on the Mizbeach. So there's no reason to remember it. It's right in front of us. It's still there. What Avram did and Yitzchak and Yaakov did, that we have to remember. So October 7th, remembering, and that's something we could talk about in 10 years. But right now, this is ongoing. I just saw the picture of the baby that was taken hostage, is now a toddler, and it's heartbreaking. It's happening, and our soldiers are still fighting, and they're still in Gaza and they're in the north, so it's going on. So to remember, hopefully, it's in the conscience of every single Jew. I don't think that's necessarily a message for this year. A person could speak about the Gvura the Jews had, and the Jews came together, whether they were in the country on October 7th and they ran right into the fire, or they were outside the country and they came, and dedication that they have for the country. Baruch Hashem, that we're able to see that. But there's something else that I noticed. Now, when October 7th first happened, in the first month, 2 months, 3 months, we were inundated with information, with articles, people's opinions. So we were all watching the news, trying to find out what happened, hear stories, personal stories. And one of the things I realized at one point, that it gave everyone who thought about it an opportunity, if they saw what was going on, to maybe try to analyze their view on life, their viewpoint, what their hashkafa was about certain ideas, and whether it was correct or not. Just to go ahead and start with a few examples. For example, there was one story I read about somebody, and I obviously read all these stories, I forgot the details, that was locked in her mamad in one of the kibbutzim, and Rahman al-Itzlan, I would just say, God, it's terrible. I think her daughter-in-law, that some of the terrorists shot through the door, and her daughter-in-law was killed right in front of them. And then, so Zaka was there at some point to help them out. And all of a sudden she realized, because she used to think she lived in a very secular lifestyle, didn't have anything to do with, let's say, the more Chareidi groups in Israel. And she thought that they did nothing for the country. And all of a sudden she realized, wow, they are really helping out with the country. This has nothing to do with other areas, but she was able to say that. I realized that really all Jews are willing to go ahead and to help out.
Because Zaka is a Haredi-run organization.
Zaka is a Haredi-run organization. I assume that, I would just say that I think Zaka has all types that work with Zaka. It happened that the people that came to her were definitely Chareidi Jews, and it changed her perspective to see that everyone is going ahead and willing to help out. And again, and I don't know what happened in the aftermath that she necessarily changed, how she felt about Torah and what she felt about, how her relationships with other Jews. But certainly from the article, it says it gave her a chance to pause and think and say, maybe I was incorrect about what I thought about other Jews. And I think that, we saw this all over. And I think even personally in our life, and now, by the way, sometimes when you think about something, it doesn't mean you change your viewpoint. It means you think about it, and it could be you reinforce your viewpoint. Something I have to say is that, I made Aliyah, as many people I know made Aliyah. And a lot of times this year, as I had one son that spent months and months in Miluim. He was called to be by Jenin for a number of months, and then he was somewhere in near, I think, Somat Tapuach, and then he's supposed to go back to the Otef after Sukkot.
That means near Gaza.
Near Gaza. And then I have another son. He joined the army in March. And I have to tell you that going to the ceremony where his Tekes Hashpa'ah, that's a ceremony where they're inducted formally into the army, was such an impressive scene because you saw so many. My son is in what's called Shiryon tanks, and there must have been close to between 800 and 900 new lochamim, new soldiers, they said. And the way they were all there and the simcha, the joy the families had at a time of war, I was astounded by it. I couldn't believe it. But you do think that, you think back and say, well, you know what? If I had stayed in America, where would my life have taken me? By the way, no one ever knows life would have taken them. But looking to say, probably I would have probably sent my son Aaron, who is the one who is in the army now, and I'll get to my other son. He would probably have been here for Shana Bet in Israel, learning, having a great time growing, then going back to America. And because my wife and I made the decision to make Aliyah, here they are, going to the army. Right now, he is on the border between Israel and Gaza. He's ready to go into Gaza, right? And his unit is supposed to go into the north after Sukkot, or actually before Sukkot, I'm not even sure. And if I had made a different decision, maybe my kid's life would have been different. And I have one more son I would just mention who's actually in Hesder. He's studying in Akko, and he's supposed to join the army in March, and he's ready to go also. And he would have been here, this would have been his Shana Bet, and I'm sure he learned up a storm and done well and going back. And I think maybe I should have made a different decision. I realized no, because the place for a Jew to be is in the land of Israel. And then I said, and the place for a boy to be is in the army. That's what the Torah wants. And really the true Avodas Hashem is these boys are the boys and the girls who are in the army fighting for the eternity of Eretz Yisrael and Am Yisrael. And so it gave people opportunity to rethink their decisions and reinforce, and maybe sometimes think, maybe I should have thought differently. For me, it was an opportunity to realize that I was doing the right thing. And it's a schut. It's a merit to live in Eretz Yisrael, be part of this. And, I think my children feel it's a schut for them to be in the army, to help and fight for Eretz Yisrael.
Yeah, my son is also in Shir, my son Yaki, the one who's up north right now. I can't say that at his Tekes Hashpa'ah, which was a few months before our own, at his Tekes Hashpa'ah, when he was sworn in, I can't say I was so joyful. I was very scared. I'm very, very proud, and I know this is the only thing for him to be doing, but it's terrifying for me. And it's not so easy for me to always I have to remind myself, I should say, that of course this is what he should be doing, and I know that intellectually. Emotionally, though, it's sometimes difficult to absorb that.
I think you mentioned to me about Yaki, that really this was Yaki's choice. He could have gotten out of it. I think you might have mentioned on the podcast previously.
Yeah, he could have gotten out of it had he wanted to, but he didn't want to.
If you and your wife had taken a different path in life, right? He would definitely wouldn't have chosen that. And here, you imagine he put everything on the line for Am Yisrael and Eretz Yisrael. That's amazing. So, I don't know if you went through this process of questioning your decisions in life, but if it did, I assume it reinforced that it was the right decision. So I think the whole October 7th war gave people a very, very important opportunity to sit back and think about decisions they made and to reinforce, or maybe I should have thought things through a little differently. I would just add that on the other side, a lot of people come speak to me. Sometimes I wonder why people are speaking to me, and someone came to speak to me. And I know, by the way, this is not the only person that felt this way. They raised their children to be involved in learning Torah. Now, I would say, by the way, learning Torah is very important. There's no question about that. And I raised my children to learn Torah, and I want my children to go to yeshiva afterwards and always to realize the chashivah of Torah. And even though I know, Mirz Hashem, after they finish the army and they finish yeshiva and they go to work, I always want them to feel the important kfiyat itim l'Torah and realize how special Torah is, and maybe to aspire to be able to learn Torah all the time. However, that being said, as I said, one of the changes that I thought this year was that when we speak about, should yeshiva bachrim be drafted, I don't get involved in the whole issue, what they call shivyon banetel, to be equal, it's not fair. It's very hard for me to understand what's fair, what's not fair. I just say, in this discussion at the table, that I say, the Torah wants an Oved Hashem to go to the army. I'm a little bit too old to do it, and this is what the Torah wants. Not everyone has that zchut. Someone once came to speak to me, and it's not just one person. I've heard it from others that they made the decision that they would like their kids to be involved in learning, and they're so proud of their children. But when October 7th happened, they were speaking to their children, maybe you should go ahead and maybe you should do something for the war effort to help. And sometimes some of the boys would say, you're right, what can I do? And some they say, why? I'm just learning. And a number of people I know it bothered a little bit that their children felt that all they have to do was to learn. And again, they feel learning is important, learning is important, but maybe they should have made different decisions in life. And the truth is, there's certain things in life you can't change, but it gave a different perspective to people that, wow, the people that are going to the army are really very, very special. And it helped change the way they saw the world. And I would just say, for example, myself, for me, it changed even my thought process. Because a lot of times I always try not to judge. But when I look at soldiers, I realize, wow, these soldiers are the most special Jews that I know. And this really helped me. Now, would I have thought of that 2-3 years ago? I might have. But I didn't have a chance to think about it. I took much more notice of what soldiers go through when they're in the army, when they're in Gaza, when they're in Lebanon. They're training. And obviously, everyone has to be the best Oved Hashem possible. But the soldiers that are going in to defend Klal Yisrael, in terms of being an Oved Hashem, I think nothing compares to that. And this is a perspective I received after October 7th.
I was talking to a very wise friend of mine yesterday as I was walking to Ma'ariv, and we were talking about some of the same things. And the way I described it to him is I think that the center of gravity of Klal Yisrael today is not among the people sitting in the base medrash on Tzom Gedalia. It's the people on the border of Gaza, the people on the border or inside Lebanon or inside these places, in Jenin, the people who are defending us. Everyone's important. But if you want to talk about the center of gravity, who are the Jews whom we're going to speak about in 100, 200, 300 years, the ones we're going to talk about the same way now when we talk about Hanukkah, we talk about the Maccabim. We don't really talk about the people who are sitting in the base medrash. We talk about the people who fought on behalf of Am Yisrael, Matityahu and his sons. That's who we mentioned in the liturgy. I think the same thing is true here. Those Jews, those young Jews who have been so impressive, and admittedly, I'm complimenting my son and your son, but so many of them who voluntarily go in, don't try to get out of it, and do everything they can, and just are so enthusiastic about defending Am Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, Medinat Yisrael, for Hashem. It's just an unbelievable experience to watch them and be in awe of them.
For sure. And I would just add, by the way, that I think it's important to speak about those are the real heroes, but also the other unsung heroes are the parents, which I might not have thought about before, but I definitely thought about this year. As someone said, we hope that the soldiers who are going out to fight, everyone hopes will come back healthy and safe and go back to their family. But the trauma that the family experiences, and I'm talking about the soldiers who come back healthy and safe, right? It's something which is also of a heroic nature. As a matter of fact, in the shul itself, when I speak to people who have similar to yourself, who have sons that are in Lebanon right now. And I take that worry they have with them upon me, and to see what they're going through, it affects me. But it gave me a perspective, not just the soldiers, but even the families of soldiers, those families that maybe the parents were not able to join the army because they were living in Chutz La'aretz, and they made Aliyah at a later age. But they also are going through something very special, and to realize the heroic nature of the parents that have raised their children to be ready to go into war to defend Klal Yisrael.
When I was sitting shiva for my father about 6 months ago, there were some parents there of soldiers who are lone soldiers, parents who live in the United States, friends of our family, and they have kids in Israel fighting at that time in Gaza. And even though I had other things in my mind, I couldn't help but just tell them how I think they are, in a certain way, the top of the top. It's hard to describe the dedication, the education that a parent who doesn't even live in Israel gives his child, so that child goes to Israel and fights on behalf of Am Yisrael when they don't even have to. Our children, to a certain degree, even though, of course, they could get out of it, but it's part of the culture here. It's part of what they're supposed to do. For a parent in America or elsewhere to allow their children or to encourage their child to go to Israel to fight on behalf of the state of Israel and the people of Israel, to me, that's just another level.
It's amazing. And actually, whenever I meet a lone soldier, I always want to ask, what happened? How did this happen? I remember when my son Aaron went into the army, it was a very nice celebration in the yeshiva, and I think there were 4 boys from America that were going to be lone soldiers. And I asked my son Aaron, I said, how did that happen? And he said to me, for sure, it comes from the home. There's no question about it. And those homes are very, very special. They talk about that living in America. It's amazing. It's amazing, amazing. At
the same time, I'm going to look at the other side of the coin. Before we talked about, and you mentioned, Rav Chaim, how that woman in that secular kibbutz in Gaza was so impressed with Zaka and the Chareidi people who came to help her out and said, wow, Jews are so good and there's so much good in all Jews. There's been a lot of bitterness. I'll say specifically in the Dati Lumi, the national religious community. I'm assuming also in the secular community, but I don't know because that's not my community. But there's been a lot of bitterness towards many of the ultra-Orthodox people who still refuse to go to the army, who, in my mind, they can quote Gemaras, they can quote Rishonim, but it doesn't work. It's simply impossible to make it work unless you already decided that's what you want your conclusion to be. It doesn't make any sense based on halacha, in my very not expert opinion. And people are bitter about it. I'm not sure how we balance that, this fact that we're supposed to try and be unified. And at the same time, I've said this many times, sometimes the demand for unity is most often used by people who want the status quo to remain as it is. So if you say, you should be helping more, they say, oh, you're dividing us, you're creating disunity. What do you suggest in terms of balancing those two ideas?
It's a very difficult question because I think that the most important midah that we need is achdus. Okay, as a matter of fact, one of the biggest changes in perspective that we saw, if we remember, which I'm not going to get into right now because I don't even understand it, right before the war started, we were dealing with the judicial reform. So without dealing with who was right, who was wrong, I don't know enough to give an answer on that. Remember, there were people who were saying at that time, we're not going to fight to defend the state of Israel. And then when the war started, everybody came, everyone, and it showed that really the country is very connected and we're all together. So first I would start off that I don't think there's any problem with stating that a certain shita is incorrect. But when we start degrading the individual, and I'll just say something that I actually heard on one of your podcasts when David Bloom spoke, and David Bloom, as you know, is I would say is a very close friend of mine, one of the original founders of the shul, but we're neighbors. And one of the lines he made, and I thought that was very important, is that when he sees an individual person who does not go to the army, he doesn't feel anger at him. He feels, it's really the leadership that is not trying to change, that's not trying to change things. And I would just mention, by the way, there are a lot of those in the Chareidi world that actually wanted to go to the army. There's someone who told me he grew up very Chareidi. He must be in his mid-30s. He said, I wanted to join the army. He said, but it just his words to me wasn't shayach. It wasn't possible. And I think that we have to go ahead and we have to look at the individuals, as individuals are still Jews that are caring, and they care about Klal Yisrael, and they grew up in a certain environment which prevents them from joining the country or joining the army. And in a certain sense, it's become, for a certain reason, as part of the culture, it makes it very, very difficult to understand. And just understand, for those that do go to the army, to understand the hurdles they have gone over, it's amazing. When you speak about the American parents sending their sons here as lone soldiers, which is amazing. Anyone, and I've met a number of them who grew up in the Chareidi world and has chosen to go to the army, to imagine how important it is to him and what he has to have to go through in order to accomplish it. It's an amazing, amazing thing. And I think we have to look at individuals and understand, as David said, the leadership maybe should make changes, but every Jew by himself is actually very good. But that allows us to criticize the opinions that other people have.
My problem has been, Rav Chaim, exactly that, because that begs the question. And I'll say first, yes, completely. David was absolutely right. There's no animosity towards any individual per se. It's towards the shita, towards the way of looking at things, and towards the leadership. On a personal level, when I've written about this, more than even podcasted about it, sometimes people write to me. And one of the things they say is, well, the leadership knows more than you do, which I acknowledge, and therefore, how dare you criticize what they're saying? For example, I have said numerous times that I think that the long Bein Hazmanim, there is 3 weeks off in Tishrei, there's 3 weeks off in Av, and 4 weeks off in Nisan. That means 10 weeks off of vacation a year, not to mention, for many, not all, Friday and Shabbos. That's a lot more vacation than people normally get, and frankly, it seems to me a lot more vacation than is necessary if people truly believe and truly say that they are involved in protecting Klal Yisrael, that they take the idea that Torah protects literally, not as a spiritual reality, but as a physical reality. And if that's the case, I said, how dare you take off 10 weeks a year plus? That's homicidal if you believe you're protecting Klal Yisrael. To which some people responded, you think you know more than the Gdolei Hador who say we should have 10 weeks of vacation? You're just wrong. So on the one hand, we can say it's the leadership, but then people come back and say, but the leadership knows more than you. How dare you criticize the leadership?
So we're going to get into the discussion of Das Torah, and I think it's always okay to express your opinion, especially when it's backed up, right? And I don't want to mention names here, but there are people who are very famous personalities in the world who've said there's no question that when Klal Yisrael is defending itself, it is considered Melchemes Mitzvah. I saw the Chazon Ish says that. I think Rav Yashiv says it. There's no question about that. We are allowed to say what our opinion is, and a person has to come back and tell us, well, why you're wrong. I once heard from my father, he once explained, what is Das Torah? Das Torah is that you can go ahead and you can bring a source from the Torah that backs up what you say. Das Torah is not, well, this is what I feel. That's what a Navi can come and tell you the Dvar Hashem. But we have to go ahead and we have to bring a source from the Torah. Many times I heard from my father, he would say something with a little viewpoint, but he would always back it up for something. He wouldn't just say, this is my opinion. So I understand. And for me, the biggest challenge I have had with this whole issue is, what does the halacha say? What does the Torah say? Okay, and the truth is, if the Torah would say, and I've actually challenged people on it, and I said, I don't understand if the army needs people, right? There's a halacha, you have to go, and people have agreed, yes, it's true, but if you're not going to deal with the issues at hand, you just say, well, this is the situation, you're not going to get to the true halacha. I don't want to answer your question because we're coming into the issue of Das Torah. And yes, Das Torah means that if you can bring something from the Torah that proves what you say, and yes, you might be able to find the Medrash, and the Medrash seems to imply that learning Torah, that it protects people in battle. However, when you look at the straight halacha and the poskim, it turns out that everyone should do what they can in terms of fighting. If they can, then it's very challenging for me. And that has been the greatest challenge for me in this whole discussion. Not about, as I said, whether it's fair or not fair. I like to say there's a halacha. Just like there's a halacha when it comes to muksa, what's the halacha? Halacha when it comes to what's kosher and treif, same thing. And when it comes to the army, what's the halacha there also? That's what's important to me.
You told me a couple of weeks ago that the thing that in some ways bothers you the most is the claim that some people make when they say, we're learning in yeshiva instead of being in the army, we're really being Moser Nefesh. We're giving ourselves over in the same way that soldiers are. We're sacrificing. I'm not sure what the exact English terminology would be. We're giving our souls for the sake of Torah. And to compare what one does in the army, either in Gaza or Lebanon or Jenin or anywhere else, to learning Torah, I don't mean the value of it, but the Mesiras Nefesh, the sacrifice, the personal investment that's involved, I think it's very hurtful.
So I think we're not appreciating what the soldiers are going through. I don't want to talk about this on the podcast, but I'll just tell you that, I heard stories from family who were in Gaza, and exactly they had to stay in a truck for 2 weeks, okay? So, as I said, it's not appropriate to talk about, but what the living conditions were for 2 weeks. And to compare it to somebody, and as I said, learning is great, it's important, but to go ahead and say that people who are sitting in a beis medrash, and hopefully it's air-conditioned, and want to be air-conditioning, compare it to that is ludicrous. And I think we have to appreciate what the soldiers are going through. And by the way, I'm all for appreciating what those who are learning going through also. But if you go ahead and say and compare the two and say they're equal, you're not appreciating what the soldiers are going through.
I want to mention something else that we talked about at the beginning when you talked about Arab produce and that Yistal Kustonenu with the beets, with the selek. And one thing which we talked about before we went on the air was how maybe people have changed their viewpoint vis-a-vis coexistence. This is something which, Rav Chaim, is very difficult for me because I'm pretty much a centrist. I'm not too right-wing. I'm not too left-wing. I like to take each issue on its own. I'm also someone who wants to believe in human nature, that it's not about the Arabs per se, but it's about individuals who make good or bad choices. And I would hope that there are plenty of Arabs out there who realize that Hamas and Hezbollah are evil, and this is the wrong side of the equation, and it's the side of evil rather than the side of good. I am absolutely sure that there are plenty of people in the Arab world who do recognize that Hamas and Hezbollah and their ilk are the side of evil, and Israel is representing the side of good. And I also have to acknowledge that there are plenty of people who don't think that way. I know people who have gone into Gaza. I know soldiers who've gone into Gaza and report that in almost literally every single house they go into, whether it's a Hamas house or a civilian house, there are posters and books celebrating Hamas. There's ammunition. There's all sorts of evidence that indicates that they have no interest in siding with Israel. They have every interest in siding with Hamas, and they believe in what Hamas says. There are some polls that show that in the West Bank and in Gaza, people still side with Hamas overwhelmingly. There are also other polls I should mention that show the opposite. I don't know which are which, but sometimes it's very hard to maintain that hope, that sense of we really do have good people there if we could only find them. I guess I'm struggling with this right now because when you said at the beginning that giving money to Arabs, these are our enemies, in practice, it's not a racist thing. In practice, when you're giving it to Gaza, Gaza is controlled by Hamas. Hamas openly says they want to kill every Jew on the planet, so we can't deny they are our enemies. At the same time, it's very hard for me to say, oh, therefore, quote-unquote, Arabs are bad. I'm just telling you my own personal struggle here. I wish there were a way to have coexistence, even if it's going to take a long time. What do you think about all this?
What do I think? Look, I would.
That's
just
a
say,
big question.
It's a very big question. I would just say like this: that my father, many years ago, and my father was an Isha Emes, a man of truth. He was very opposed to. I want to use a proper terminology to give away land. He was very opposed. And again, many times he said certain things, but one thing he said to me was he did not believe. And by the way, in those days, those were the days of Arafat. Okay, who maybe caused all the problems in Lebanon also. And I remember when Arafat died, and I made a comment that, like, why is the world praising him? He was a terrible person, not just to Jews, even to his own people. This goes back many years. My father said to me, I don't believe that giving land to the Arabs is going to cause peace. That's what he said. He didn't believe that. So, when we speak about people who are connected to a terrorist organization, I don't think it's possible to have peace with them. Okay. Now let's talk. Let's stop for a second. So, and again, it sounds like, look, when we speak about Gaza, in Gaza they had an opportunity to make peace. They had to build up their economy, and it was given over to Hamas. When we speak about Lebanon, it's very possible once we can get rid of Hezbollah in Lebanon, we can actually live with the Lebanese in peace, because the Lebanese themselves are suffering. So I think when we talk about peace, I think it was in this week's Parsha that, and I didn't see them unfortunately deal with this, but HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, they switched me for a lo elakah, I'm going to switch them for a lo am. And what does lo am mean? A lo am means me, a terrorist. Terrorists are lo am. Hamas are terrorists.
A non-nation.
Hezbollah is a non-nation. And I have to believe that the Houthis are also a non-nation. And those will never have peace. That's what the Torah says. Those that are a nation, look, we made peace, the United Arab Emirates. We have some sort of deal going on with Jordan, not sure what it is. But anyone who is a Lo Am or who is connected to Lo Am, I think with them there'll never be peace. That's my opinion. I don't know for sure.
So, Rav Chaim, as we conclude today on this very difficult day, but also a day leading up to Yom Kippur, which is the most hopeful day of the year, can you end perhaps with some words of tikva, some words of yesh tikva lach, something that we can look forward to even in the dark days?
So just say one of the thoughts that have been coming back to me over and over on October 7th was to see the gevurah of the Jewish people, the dedication of the Jewish people, of the young boys and the young girls and adults and everyone who's getting together. And not only that, even the concern of all Jews. And the truth is, again, I live in Ramat Beit Shemesh. I don't say everybody, but I would just say that when I see all Jews that are coming in, and it doesn't make a difference what they look like, they're all very concerned. And it's true. Not everyone is doing what I would want them to do. Not everyone's in the same place, but all the Jews are coming together and they care about everybody. And I think through that will be the schut of everyone's work and concern that the Mitzvah Hashem will bring, as I said, we spoke at the beginning, the end goal. And we should only have happy things to talk about, and we won't have to deal with tragedy.
Amen. Rav Chayim Soloveichik, thank you for joining me. Subscribe to the Orthodox Conundrum podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and please rate it and write a review. Please visit jewishcoffeehouse.com for other episodes of the Orthodox Conundrum, as well as many other great podcasts, including Intimate Judaism, The Maimonides Minute, Chochmat Nashim, The Francisca Show, and Let My People Eat. I'd appreciate it if you go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review the Orthodox Conundrum. It takes literally 2 minutes. It's just giving a certain number of stars and writing 1 or 2 sentences. Please like the Orthodox Conundrum podcast on Facebook and join our growing Facebook group, the Orthodox Conundrum Discussion Group, where you can feel free to discuss issues in Orthodoxy in an honest and friendly environment. I hope you'll become a Jewish Coffee House patron on Patreon. Just click on the link in the description of this podcast, and you can get bonus episodes, Jewish Coffee House merch, and more. You'll get special episodes on all sorts of topics that are only available to subscribers, and you'll be helping Jewish Coffee House spread our message of a welcoming, intellectually engaged, and honest Orthodoxy. Just join Patreon. It's only a couple of dollars a month, and you can stop anytime, so join today. Finally, do you have a message that needs to get out? Do you want to promote your business, your organization, or your cause? The best way is by producing a podcast, and Jewish Coffee House can make it happen. I have experience producing hundreds of podcasts, both for myself and for satisfied clients. Whether you want to learn everything you need in one day, or relax and record and let me do the heavy lifting, Jewish Coffee House Productions will work with you to make it happen and make it even better than you imagined. Let me help you today. Write to me at scott@jewishcoffeehouse.com or go to jewishcoffeehouse.com, click on Productions, and sign up for a free consultation. Make your voice heard, promote your cause, sell your product, and engage an audience now. I'm Scott Kahn. This has been The Orthodox Conundrum on JewishCoffeehouse.com.